Mr. Speaker, I look at some of the other challenges that we have as a province, and we've been calling for schools to be built for a long time as an opposition. You know, we recognize that many communities are without schools, but we also recognize that many schools need to be repaired. These aren't just, you know, cosmetic repairs, Mr. Speaker. The repairs as it relates to asbestos and electrical challenges. And from that government, Mr. Speaker, we haven't seen the support that those schools, that those students, that those teachers require. So we've been calling for new schools to be built in communities that don't have them. We've been calling for gyms like that of Sacred Heart, which is crumbling, Mr. Speaker, to be built, not the temporary solution that's in place right now. We call for schools like Pleasant Hill with asbestos and electrical issues to be addressed. But we didn't see much of that in this throne speech, Mr. Speaker. What we did have sort of popped on Saskatchewan people is this P3 school scheme that that government brought forward. And you know, we've done a lot of research on P3s, and certainly done our homework. And I certainly don't oppose P3s on ideological grounds. Do so on the evidence, Mr. Speaker. Do so from a perspective of common sense. Do so from learning from other jurisdictions like Nova Scotia, like New Brunswick, like Alberta, Mr. Speaker, like the United Kingdom, Mr. Speaker. And what we see in the experience of these P3 schemes, Mr. Speaker, far more often than not, is excess costs. Dollars that are simply costing, these facilities simply costing taxpayers more than they should. And if you think about cost, any dollar that's going to this private sector scheme, Mr. Speaker, that's not going directly into the classroom is wrong-headed, Mr. Speaker. So these excess costs are certainly a concern. We see that by way of the fact that the private sector consortia is often international, or certainly borrowing at a much higher rate. We see so as well in the fact that the ability to put together these complex contracts jack up costs for putting together these structures, Mr. Speaker. And then we know as well that these are expensive to monitor. So you know, it's kind of it's disappointing, Mr. Speaker. We've been calling for schools to be built in the communities that need them, like Hampton Village, like Northwest Regina, like Southeast Regina, Mr. Speaker. But people don't want privatized schools, Mr. Speaker. They want schools that are affordable, that meet the needs of their community, that reflect their community. You know, and I think when you talk about even the reflection of a community, I think of Arcola School or Douglas Park School. I think of Arcola School, Mr. Speaker, that was built in concert and with discussion with community to reflect community needs. Well, that's all lost in this sort of rent-a-school approach that we see from government, this buy now, pay it later scheme, and this sort of bulk buy that they're going to do for schools across the province. And you know what I get a kick out of, Mr. Speaker, and I think what most people get a kick out of, is this government last year took over the purchasing of portables for all the school divisions. Of course, the school divisions had a great history in getting the portables that they needed built and in place to meet the needs of their divisions, and they did so at a very affordable rate. But this government decided that it would take that over, that they would bulk buy them, that they'd actually contract out of province. Actually, quite a few contractors that had been doing this in Saskatchewan lost out in that piece as well. And they promised, oh, it's going to be cheaper, it's going to be better. Kind of the same kind of language and rhetoric we hear around P3s. But, Mr. Speaker, I think we have to look to their recent record on this. The school year came along. We had classrooms with over 50 students inside them, Mr. Speaker. 50 students in a classroom, if you can imagine. And we had portables that were nowhere to be seen. And when they came, Mr. Speaker, late, a couple months late, Mr. Speaker, what we found with those portables, hearing from school divisions, is that it sent them the wrong product. It sent them the wrong classroom. So, you know, I get a kick, Mr. Speaker, for a government that can't even procure portables, can't even buy a few relocatable classrooms, Mr. Speaker, in a bulk buying process, to think that it can now go out and deal with international private sector consortia to build private sector schools for tomorrow. Mr. Speaker, as I say, we oppose the plan they put forward on on common sense grounds. We know the delays that are in place to get a P3 school up are significant. We know that we can get those schools built faster and quicker, dealing with them in a traditional way. We know the experience of Nova Scotia, that when they went out and built these, and it was a Liberal government that built the schools, P3s, that scheme was then cancelled or scrapped by the Conservative government, who said it was far too elaborate, far too costly. And the Conservatives and then the auditor weighed in afterwards and said that the new schools, built through a traditional perspective, were saving them $2 million a school, Mr. Speaker. Those $2 million, Mr. Speaker, are $2 million that can be placed directly into the classroom, where it directly impacts student learning, Mr. Speaker. So we don't need costly, expensive, private schemes of this government. We need real solutions that matter to students, and we need the schools that they need to be in the shape that they deserve, and we need the schools that are needed in communities that don't have them. We needed them yesterday. We needed them last year. But in this case, no more delays are acceptable, Mr. Speaker. We look at some of the other areas as well, Mr. Speaker. My wife was here observing the throne speech, and she's a teacher, and she was looking at the education piece, and she opened it up and listened and walked out afterwards and said, well, what'd you think, hun? What was your perspective on the throne speech? And she went right to education. She says, what's this? She knows the challenge that teachers are facing. She's a teacher herself. She's in the classroom. More challenging, more complex classrooms than ever before. Increased class size, cut supports by this government, Mr. Speaker, and not a mention of anything to alleviate those pressures, to support student learning, Mr. Speaker. Some mention of further consultation, Mr. Speaker. Well, the fact that consultation with the education sector and with teachers has become a novel concept with this government is a sad statement in itself. That's how it's supposed to work. That's how we've built the province that we have. That's how the education sector has worked. It's not always worked out perfectly, but it's a collaborative. It's about working with educational partners. And the fact that this government, I thought, had recognized their failures in education, I thought had gone out and apparently had listened. I know the Premier listened to a few teachers in a few different cities, Mr. Speaker. What I thought was we'd see a vision and a plan to support students' learning, to address the challenges in the classroom, to address the class size pressures that are in place, to scrap the wrong-headed, costly, standardized testing agenda that this government continues to push without any evidence or support, Mr. Speaker. But we didn't see any of that. What we saw is that they're going to talk some more, Mr. Speaker. Well, I think teachers and students and parents are getting tired of the talk, Mr. Speaker. They're looking for some action, and they're looking for some support, and our students deserve nothing less. When I go across in my critic areas meeting with municipalities,